This is pitched with a tone of a little bit more surety, where I look at the USL putting down the hard 2028 date for both of these things, saying, yeah, it'll be 5 to 7 years before it really gets going, but we're going to have something in place when we get to 28. I think that is a meaningful line of demarcation. I think bringing Tony Scholes in to be the guy who's running this is probably a statement of intent as well.
Big week on the USL news front. Some questions answered, some others not. And on a week like this, who else to bring in than USL Tactics himself, expert in all things USL, John Morrissey. Welcome aboard Morning Kickaround once again, sir.
Yeah, pleasure to be back.
Obviously, a good reason to have you on the show. John, Tuesday was somewhat momentous. I am enough of a cynic to look at that information and go, well, there's not a lot here. I mean, there's something. It's a bone tossed out on this plan for USL to launch their first division and obviously introduce Pro Rel. What was the thing when USL made this announcement on Tuesday that was most interesting to you?
Yeah, I think it was the declaration of what the league composition is going to look like when they do launch USL Premier, which is that there's going to be 8 teams that you know and love coming up from the championship, possibly 6 to 8 that don't exist or aren't playing right now. Now, there are ways to read that. There's a strict version where it's all expansion teams that we don't know about yet. There's another version where it's something like Atletico Dallas that we've seen hit the ground running, the revival of OKC Energy, and possibly North Carolina FC. But the fact that there probably has to be something behind the scenes where the USL feels comfortable saying, we have D1 ready ownership groups, partners that we're looking to bring to the table, that's something we hadn't really considered when you've thought about what USL Premier might look like.
Right.
Well, okay, so that's what gets you is the structure of what they're looking at and who might be composing these leagues. What was something that was missing from that announcement Tuesday that you kind of been hoping to learn?
I mean, concrete details is a broad umbrella, but there is still a lot to figure out in terms of what does a regional League One look like? What are the TV deals going to be that make this a financial step up? Probably most importantly, there is the issue of the Pro League standards from US Soccer, where we still don't know that there's going to be leniency waivers given that get rid of the 15,000 seat stadium issue, that cover potentially a market size issue, depending on how the composition of the league ends up looking. And you can debate how much does it matter if US Soccer says, okay, it's not actually a D1, but then they're doing Pro Rel anyway. Maybe it's code D2s. That's in the eye of the beholder. And I think League HQ in Tampa could still go to potential sponsors and partners and say, look, we've got Pro Rel. Sanctioning is what it is. Nobody cares about that in practice. But I think it is an issue that has to be resolved.
Yeah, I mean, that again, there's some of that lack of concrete detail is what stands out. I mean, reading Paul McDonough's quotes that are kind of peppered in various pieces that are around the internet, including with Paul Tenorio and Sports Business Journal, he said something like 5 to 7 years and a runway to kind of get them to the full build out of this. Now, so many things can happen between now and then, and I'm not just going to hand them my trust, John, and go, absolutely, this is going to go great. And that doesn't mean I don't think it can happen. You have to recognize all the pitfalls along the way. So when fans, and look, when we did our video on Wednesday with this announcement, it's an incredibly popular video because people are anxious to learn more. They want to know what's going to happen. They want ProRel to enter the chat, so to speak. When Paul McDonough says 5 to 7 years, when they talk about 12, 14 teams and how many teams will be promoted and relegated, do you think any of that is something we can actually know, or even USL could actually know right now ahead of populating the first division, ahead of figuring out what the US or what the Pro League standards might be with ProRel involved?
The USL does have a reputation of throwing things out there because they want to control the narrative. You think about the barrage of expansion efforts that some of them perfectly promising, and you really feel like there is there. And a lot of them are, we have a loose agreement with Santa Rosa, California, that's never going to turn into anything, but it gives them a good week in the news cycle. This is pitched with a tone of a little bit more surety, where I look at the USL putting down the hard 2028 date for both of these things, saying, yeah, it'll be 5 to 7 years before it really gets going, but we're going to have something in place when we get to 28. I think that is a meaningful line of demarcation. I think bringing Tony Scholes in to be the guy who's running this is probably a statement of intent as well. There's a lot to determine. From everything I gather, the players and the owners can be behind the 8 ball in terms of getting this information at the same time you or I might. But I think there is enough meat on the bone that something is going to be new when we get to the 28 season.
Yeah. All right. So again, looking at this, and it, the full build out of USL Premier is 20 teams, right? Which is sort of the standard league size that everybody thinks is the right one, for reasons of scheduling and balance your schedule and things like that. It says national table. Championship at Division 2, national table, balanced schedule. So the same thing, 20 teams, which that league is obviously bigger right now, and some of those teams will go up and that kind of thing. Does that indicate to you that champions, I know this is such a small detail with all the other bigger issues in front of USL, but does that indicate to you that we won't be determining champions by the traditional playoff tournament?
I think if you talk to owners and clubs who see the attendance boost for playoffs, they know what that means getting extra home dates. I would be surprised to see them get rid of a playoff.
I would be
now, maybe
surprised
that's a promotion playoff, but
that's the thing. Like, obviously, promotion playoffs make sense, John. So you would have, something. Now, like, it could be like the English system, which obviously the names are aping the English system. So you could have, the top 2 teams eventually, after the full 5 to 7 year build out, eventually have the top 2 teams in the championship go up to Premier and then have a playoff a la the English championship. But at the top division, you're then doing playoffs to determine your league champion among the teams that aren't getting relegated, I would presume. And then I don't know again about the bottom if it's a straight relegate. Again, these are things that I'm projecting into a very uncertain future.
No, they're things that just aren't settled yet, and they're on the list of you've got to decide that. You have to figure out what do parachute payments or, in the short term, promotion payments look like to get people up to speed. I imagine a lot of these are going to be contentious conversations. So we are very much not out of the woods yet, but I do attribute some meaning to seeing what you're seeing now, an actual pyramid, a commitment to 2020 regionalization in League One. It's moving the ball forward to some extent.
Mm-hmm.
And something that I when we first talked about this on Wednesday, it seemed to me from the information released that the promotion relegation was coming at some point in the future. I've seen some things like people assuming that there will be a pro-rel mechanism in 28 when Premier starts. How do you read the information that we have at our disposal?
I mean, when they initially talked about promotion and relegation, there was talk of maybe it's a 2027 thing. So we've seen that date move back and back. I think if D1 happens, there will be pro-rel initially. And I think that's probably the best time to start it because there won't be as much of a financial gap between the leagues.
Mm-hmm.
If USL Premier does grow like they think it's going to grow, and the revenue is that much different than the championship, then it becomes more difficult to convince those owners to say, okay, cool, you could give that up if you have a bad season. When it is, this is new, I imagine not that differentiated, probably easier to get the buy-in. And then there is the inertia of, well, we've got pro-rel, that's the system.
I want to talk about League One a little bit. I mean, the natural inclination, and I know you're not necessarily this person, but the big shiny object is Premier and Championship and how those interact and the number of teams and the promotion and relegation system, all that stuff. But to me, it's much more fascinating to see what USL is trying to do with League One, because as described in the graphic that they put up, they want this to be a regional format, local rivalries, national football. And you don't have to wait. You can see what they're doing when Justin Papadakis pops up in all these mid-sized towns pitching the idea of a soccer team. We just talked about Medford, Oregon not that long ago, John, and both Rob and I, sorry, West Coast, we weren't aware of Medford, Oregon as a place, but that's a place USL is targeting because clearly what they want is Medford and Eugene and Boise and Spokane to be in a pod that limits the costs of playing professional soccer for those clubs. And that's really, it's a pyramid in the sense that you have more clubs at the bottom. That's really going to be the thing I think that ultimately determines how successful this entire system is together.
No, I completely agree. And do with it what you will. The number I've loosely heard long term is maybe you get to 80 teams in USL League One, really trying to fill out the map in the biggest way possible. But completely agreed. This has to be the baseline for growth. The expectation is you're bringing clubs in that can be regional, that can cut down on travel costs, but they also have the resources coming from HQ and the model to be able to scale up if they do get promoted. It can be a launching pad for clubs with the ambition to move up the pyramid. At best, it should be an incubator for grassroots soccer, getting the youth involved. Everything that the USL talks about as being the mission has to start in League One.
Yeah, definitely couldn't agree with you more. And it was kind of interesting how they put it here as they definitely stamp League One as the regional league of the future, but that also opens the door for like seemingly limitless amounts of expansion. Do you think that this is a positive thing that they were? I mean, I'm glad that they're centering it on regionalization because it seems obvious when we dig into League One, but does that get into the dangerous territory of just trying to make up cities with teams?
John kind of mentioned it, so let me just, because I want John to respond. But I think obviously the idea is you populate maybe 80 teams, as John says he's heard. But you have, John, the trick is to, as you said, have those teams in a position where they can move up a level and not have it be too big of a leap when you suddenly are having to fly across the country rather than playing regional matches.
Yeah, it needs to be gradual, and there has to be a thorough vetting process. Frankly, as we sit here in 2026, we are not out of the woods with USL League One, letting groups into the league that probably aren't up to par, and maybe they'll get there, maybe they trust that they'll get there. That can't be the model going forward. I'm not going to say it's going to be at 100% hit rate. Nothing ever is. That's just reality.
Well, I guess the question for me there, John, I'm sorry to interrupt you, is how much grace, how accepting should we be of the failures in that regard? Because as we said, we talk about dotting the map, and I'm kind of for this. Again, I want this to be ambitious. I want this to be the only way it seems to work is if you are really giving everybody an opportunity to get involved. But there are going to be some black eyes along the way. So how do we process those?
It's taking smart risks. If somebody comes to you and the business plan makes sense, they've got the resources, and you really think that's legitimate, go for it. Not to name names, but like you can look at Texoma, Northern Colorado, and teams that have failed, Central Valley Fuego, where there were just indicators from the start that the ownership groups locally, in terms of the business practices, in terms of what they're doing financially, they were never going to be viable. So just be smart about it is probably the line I'd take. And that's fluid. It's a you know it when you see it sort of thing. But I just want to see improvement there if this is going to be the solid base.
Well, okay, but I'm saying, as from our perspective on the outside watching this happen, and again, trying not to be overly cynical as to rain on a parade, right? We talked about this on Wednesday, the name, and stop being so negative about this thing. And I'm like, well, no, we're trying to be realistic about it. I've seen some stuff. We've been on the front lines, John. We know what American soccer can do sometimes in terms of dragging down big ideas. So I'm asking is how should I feel when USL goes into a town, makes a pitch, talks about launching a club, only to have it fall apart?
Yeah, you say grace. That is something that has to be a part of it. And I think that's been the experience with League One. There were high expectations of regionalizing earlier than this announcement that just haven't come to fruition. COVID made the growth be a little bit strange. Take it for what it is. Enjoy what it is for now. There are going to be missteps. I don't expect it to be perfect, but I want it to be a little bit more perfect as we move along here.
Yeah, and so as someone who spends a lot of time, a lot of thought, and a lot of work into USL in this sphere and working towards this, could you have imagined anything different with the way things were playing out? Would you have imagined their announcement any different than what it ended up being?
This is loosely what I envisioned, just thinking about this over the past year since they've really started moving the ball forward with D1 and Pro Rel. Would I like to see something more definite? Of course, but I think this is broadly within expectation. But frankly, I think that's true of most people who think about the USL, because this is fairly vague. Like, there's a lot of leeway here. You mentioned the 5 to 7 year thing a couple times. That gives the league some room to shift what this looks like.
Yeah.
So maybe we'll get to 2030 and I'll be surprised at the end product, but it's fluid at the moment.
Well, so much of this is wrapped up in what sports is for us and what soccer is for us specifically. The tension between, is this sort of a public property or is this a private business? And, what is the responsibility of the organizers here in the case of USL, the league, the company that is then creating the structure by which franchise agreements are, again, not to get in the weeds on the legal makeup of USL, but this isn't one big business, right? Individual clubs are individual clubs, and they're choosing to participate, and they're paying USL, and a lot's been made about the fact that the money doesn't trickle down and all of those things, John. But that tension between, is it a public thing or is it a private concern? What do they owe us in terms of information, right? So, this is a trickle. As you said, they're known for wanting to control the narrative. Do fans get to demand more? Should fans be saying, hey, why don't you tell us every team that's under consideration for Division One? Because this is going to matter to me as a fan when my club is either there or not. And hopefully you don't have fans turning their back on their club because they're not D1, but they may want to know what the future of their team is in 2 years, but certainly in 5 or 7 years.
I think that is important because it's at the core of what makes the USL different, or at least the pitch of why they're saying that. When you go D1, whether you're trying to or not, you're competing with MLS. And the criticism of MLS is that it's corporate, it's distant, and the USL lets you be close to the players and feel that sense of community. Part of that is transparency. You should be able to know where things are going, have that connection to the way that the league and the clubs are run. If that changes, what's the sales pitch? What makes the USL different? What makes it nothing more than just a way for venture investors to get involved? I think that would be my concern, and it underpins what you're saying here of you've got to take this a certain direction to make sure that the core of the USL remains.
And you want fans of new clubs to feel like, hey, this is something I can actually give myself over to because it isn't going to drop off the face of the earth or crash and burn or whatever the thing that ultimately would turn off a fan, because that's the story of American soccer, is that we try something big, we fail at it, and then we have to spend years remediating the turf, the land, the ground on which that thing happened.
No, absolutely. I think about Memphis all the time, where that team died overnight. You're getting Memphis FC this season coming in League Two. It's a sales pitch to the fans who really felt burnt by that. And you don't want that to be the case across the country if the USL tries and fails.
Yeah. So plenty to digest here with all this USL news. D1 Championship and the regionalized League One. Just a quick note before we let you go. League One now up to 18 teams. Speculation, how many will there be in League One next year?
Boy, I would just tell you 24, and that is based on very little to no information on the inside. But they're going rapid with this thing, and these teams are going for 1 year or less a lot of the time. So I'll be bold and say, 24.
A bold prediction from John Morrissey, and there's a whole lot more to unpack because obviously there's new teams in League One and new seasons ahead for the championships. So a lot more to come from you in your coverage of USL, no doubt. But we're looking down the line here today, years into the future. A pro-rel system coming to USL. Will it be a success? Will it not? Kudos to USL for grand plans, at the very least, trying to get a square peg in a round hole. Will they do it? Follow John Morrissey, USL Tactics, across social media platforms, and he'll give you the day-to-day update just about on everything.
John is everywhere.
There.
John's all over the place doing a lot of things. He's a little bit like me in that way. So Go find John wherever he exists.
All right. Thank you very much, John. And I look forward to having you on in the future to talk more things USL.
Thank you, guys.